Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and we are gathering for just one more BioWare video. We're talking about the future of BioWare, the future of Mass Effect, because we have some early numbers to take a look at for Dragon Age the Veilguard to gauge what kind of success it may or may not be enjoying. We're going to be comparing, contrasting a lot of data there. We also have some comments from EA CEO Andrew Wilson, the head of BioWare, and Gary McKay, as well as brand new information about the next Mass Effect game from project director Mike Gamble that's creating a bit of a distancing between Dragon Age the Veilguard as well as the next Mass Effect game on a tone level, but there is also a line that's going to connect these two. But like I mentioned, this is kind of one last BioWare video. You know, I kind of view it like I don't step outside my house, search my lawn, and look for dog shit to step in. And I feel like that's kind of what you're doing when you're making a ton of BioWare videos nowadays. It's just been a absolutely chaotic launch. And yeah, after everything, I just want to take a break from the BioWare discourse, but I wanted to close the chapter very similarly to what I did for Starfield, right? After Shattered Space, I was super sore. I had a bunch of kind of conversations about the game, the aftermath of it, and then eventually the future of Bethesda Game Studios. And I think it's more important here with BioWare because for many people, the belief is that everything's hanging on Dragon Age the Veilguard. This will determine the future of the studio. So this conversation is going to be in multiple parts. The first part is going to be assessing the data here, just honestly and fairly. Where does BioWare stand? What are their expectations? And can we think that BioWare might pull it off with Dragon Age the Veilguard? And then afterwards, we're going to talk about Mass Effect. We're going to talk about the future of BioWare and what we should expect from them as a company. So with that, let's begin, because right now EA's expectations are pretty damn high, which could be a concerning thing to see here, because EA boss Andrew Wilson says here in this interview with IGN that he is predicting breakout potential for Dragon Age the Veilguard thanks to limited competition, which I don't really think is an accurate assessment. I do feel like fantasy RPGs are in a highly competitive space. You just had in the last year Dragon's Dogma 2, which we'll talk about extensively, and also Baldur's Gate 3. But when you take a look here at the Steam player charts, Dragon Age the Veilguard is sitting at number 2, right behind Call of Duty Black Ops 6. And that's significant because right now, according to Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, last week's launch of Black Ops 6 was the biggest Call of Duty release ever, setting a record for day one players as well as Game Pass subscribers adds on launch day. And unit sales, this is the more important part, on PlayStation and Steam were also up 60% year over year. Now, obviously, a high tide raises all ships. This is accounting for the entirety of the game and its business on all platforms. However, Steam is the main platform we're assessing here. Keep in mind, last year was, as it is every year, a strong year for Call of Duty, but it was a weaker, stronger year for Call of Duty. What I mean by this is that Modern Warfare 3 did sell in the top 10 games of 2023 at number 2, only beat out by Hogwarts Legacy, which sold 20+ million copies. But MW3 was struggling in certain regions of the world. It was kind of a to put it nicely, off year for Call of Duty. I did not like this game at all, personally. But yeah, Modern Warfare 3 still sold a lot of copies, millions and millions of copies. Despite that, some numbers were slow in certain areas of the world, and hence why I think there is a 60% boost year over year. Nonetheless, though, it looks like Black Ops 6 is doing really well on Steam, which means that if BioWare is sitting just behind a Call of Duty game, which at one point as I'm recording this, they've kind of traded spots back and forth between number 1 and number 2, pretty good sign for BioWare there. But next up here, we do have the Steam player reviews coming in at mostly positive with over 5,000 reviews. I'm curious over time if this will change, given that, you know, people are going to experience more of the game, will opinions shift. But I will say with the surrounding discourse of the game, very surprised to see it in the mostly positive area there. Also on the Steam player charts, we're seeing a 77,465 player peak, and I do think this will go up. I could see it surpassing 100,000 over the weekend, and we're just settling into that Friday, Saturday, Sunday where I could see Dragon Age the Veilguard, people spending more time with it, getting a good boost there. But how does this compare to other games on the market? Right now, when you look at something like Xbox, their charts haven't updated, so Dragon Age the Veilguard isn't even in the top 50 as of this moment in time. Meanwhile, on PS5, according to Forbes, this was the #1 pre-ordered game on PS5 ahead of its launch, which would actually have it sitting in the middle of the Call of Duty release cycle, which we already saw is doing really well, so this is a pretty good sign for the game. But comparing it to other massive successes on Steam in 2024, Dragon's Dogma 2 had 228,000 players as an all-time peak, where something like Helldivers 2, which went completely viral, peaked at almost 500,000 with 458,208 players at its all-time peak. Now, with something a little bit more balanced, we'll look at Tekken 8, which was a great success of this year with 2 to 3+ million copies sold, and that had an all-time peak on PC of 46,130 139 players. But the real one I'm looking at here is Metaphor ReFantazio, which is at 85,194 as its all-time peak. And this is also another fantasy game. This is also, in my opinion at least, a competitor of sorts to Dragon Age the Veilguard, whether EA wants to acknowledge that or not. And Metaphor went on to sell 1 million copies in a single day. So what do we learn from these numbers? Well, first off, Dragon's Dogma 2, which had the highest single-player RPG numbers of everything we had here on the data I had gathered, managed to hit 2.5 million sales in 11 days after its launch. So what we're looking at here, most likely, in my opinion, just guesswork based on the data we have here, is that Dragon Age the Veilguard has easily blown past 1 million sales, and I could see it surpassing 2 million. The question is, what determines a success here? And that varies from company to company, situation to situation. Obviously, with BioWare, they've had a lot of messy, long development cycles between Andromeda and then Anthem, and then we know also that the Veilguard was a messy one too, unfortunately, with multiple reboots. And I do look at something like Irrational Games and BioShock Infinite as the pure example that comes to mind for me of a game can sell well and review well and still a studio will get closed down. I mean, we're seeing the same thing right now with something like Prince of Persia and Ubisoft, where they just shut down the Lost Crown team, but that just wasn't enough for their expectations. That's the other factor, is just executive expectation, and they're saying breakout hit here, which I'm not getting breakout vibes, I'm getting successful vibes, which is, I think, completely different levels of success here. We'll talk about all of that in just a moment though. But to my original point, I look at what happened with Irrational Games as well as BioShock Infinite. What happened there was a situation where it sold like 9+ million copies, game reviewed stupid well. I think it got 10 out of 10s across the board. I remember absolutely adoring it. A lot of fans loved it. It got DLC. Irrational still got shut down, right? Because the game was in development for so long, and despite it selling well compared to, I mean, so many games would kill to sell 9 million copies, but it just wasn't enough to get it across the finish line with how many times it got rebooted, how much money was spent on the project, and so they had to shut down and significantly shrink the team. So with that in mind, I could see BioWare being in that position where they find good success and the sales are great, but it's just not enough to recoup, especially when you're looking across the pond at something like Respawn Entertainment, who just sold 10+ million copies with Jedi Fallen Order, which kind of ignited this push for BioWare to get back into their single player roots because Respawn really proved it for them. And I do view like Respawn a lot of what EA is looking for in BioWare, because Respawn has their live service title, they have their single player titles, but then you look at what BioWare tried to do with Anthem, failed live service approach, and then their single player approach. It seems to be working for some with Veilguard. I know not everybody. It didn't work with me. You know, obviously I did not like the game at all. Outside of the finale, there wasn't really anything I took away from the game in a positive manner. But I look at this and sort of think to myself, like, look, you know, I don't like the game, but I don't dislike it enough to champion the downfall and the closure of BioWare. And I personally will, you'll never catch me doing that. So on to the second part of our conversation. You know, we have a good idea here of how Dragon Age the Veilguard is performing. Seems to not be doing that awful. So let's say things turn out well for BioWare, and they end up selling enough, studio stays open, and now we can kind of look forward. Like, what is going on with Mass Effect? Well, first and foremost, let's get a feel for what is the next Mass Effect, right? According to a recent Bloomberg interview with Gary McKay, quote, "The game is so important," the game being Dragon Age Veilguard, "to BioWare's future that the company brought in its second team, which has been incubating a new Mass Effect to help out during the final stretch of development. The Mass Effect team played a major role in finishing and polishing Dragon Age the Veilguard. Other companies across EA, such as its Motive studio in Montreal, also supported the game," end quote. Which, this is really common. Like, I cover a lot of Xbox stuff through Defining Duke and the channel here, and so this is just really common to see in something like First Party, where just when Starfield was getting ready to launch, like, all of the Bethesda studios were involved here. So I don't know if this is indicative of really what you should expect from Mass Effect in the terms of content creation. Like, finishing and polishing is very different from conceptualizing and creating, which is what the Veilguard team was mostly responsible for and what I personally didn't like. And there was a bit of distancing, I felt at least, created by the Mass Effect team, because Mike Gamble, who's the project director of the next Mass Effect game, said regarding tone questions, Mass Effect will maintain the mature tone of the original trilogy. This is all I'm going to say for now. And this is when reviews broke out for Dragon Age the Veilguard. So I felt it was a very odd time to be saying this, but if I were to read deeply into it, it just felt like maybe they were looking at it going, hey, you know, even if this succeeds, we don't want to have people getting the idea that this sort of writing style, this sort of energy and tone is exactly what you should expect from the next Mass Effect game. Now, where do I personally sit on expectations for the next Mass Effect game? Well, let's start off at the beginning, right? leading into the launch of Veilguard, I was pretty optimistic for it because I thought BioWare was saying a lot of things they haven't said before, like, hey, we're focusing on choice, we're focusing on single player, like we're doing these things for our players and DRM free. And like they were just doing a lot of, I thought, good business decisions. They had to kind of shut down what they were doing on SWTOR to focus on the single player stuff that they were working on. They shut down Anthem, which I thought was a good call. So it felt like they were cleaning up shop in a lot of ways to give Dragon Age the Veilguard the best chance possible to succeed in slimming their business in intelligent ways. But obviously the final product is what speaks at the end of it all. And what I played wasn't very good, where I can't sit here and, even as a lifelong BioWare fan, fool myself into optimism with the next Mass Effect game. And the unfortunate loss in this for me is that even if I were to say preview the game, like I did for Dragon Age the Veilguard, there is this air of uncertainty that will surround me even if I did like what I played, because of how I learned how the Dragon Age Veilguard preview is framed between the preview itself and then the entire game, which I explain in my review, which I saw much more of the game than I think BioWare really should have ever shown off to anyone. And so this is the fork in the road that many BioWare fans have arrived at, like myself, where I kind of look at the split and there's the desire and then there is the rationality. The rational thing is based on what I've played for the last 3 entries from BioWare's series, whether it be Mass Effect or Anthem or Dragon Age, is I've been unimpressed. Granted, I think Mass Effect Andromeda was actually really fun to play, and going back to the essence of Mass Effect 1 was definitely something that I really appreciated, but its character work desperately needs to get better, especially if you're going back to Mass Effect and you will be working on the N7 crew, right? Like this is that's a big thing to be doing right now with modern BioWare. So the rational thing, based on not hate, but just my personal experience with their games, is look, they haven't delivered for me and they're going to have to earn it from me big time if they get to the next Mass Effect game. However, the desire is I want nothing more than for them to succeed. I want to love them like I once did, but I don't know if this is like growing up. I'm about to turn 30, but you know, just kind of accepting like, man, like one of my favorite studios growing up is not what they once were, and I always had hope they would become that studio I once loved again. And I look at what happened with Bloober Team and Silent Hill 2. That's what gives me a little bit of optimism. I'm like, look, that team was in the shitter, and then they delivered my game of the year. So I'm just like, look, man, I mean, anything can happen. That's what makes the games industry so cool. But I really do hope that BioWare buckles down on writing quality. That is the thing that I think will determine Mass Effect, because I have no doubt that Mass Effect could be fun. Again, I look at Andromeda and like it had a great gameplay framework, and obviously the power system's awesome, and then getting in a vehicle and driving around these planets, like there was a lot of cool stuff in Andromeda. It just, I think, fell prey to bad characters, bad writing, of course the technical issues, but also a little bit of like that Witcher problem where you're always like tracking footsteps and scanning environments, kind of Arkham style, and just leaning into that very heavily. But I think if they get characters right, everything falls into place, because one thing we all forget is in the middle of all these releases was Mass Effect Legendary Edition, which did sell really well and I think helped BioWare financially along a bit more. But also with Mass Effect Legendary Edition, it was a very strong reminder of, oh man, right, like BioWare, there was a time like you'd play their games and go, damn. And I actually, on the PS5 behind me, it's funny enough, it's hooked up to the CRT for a retro rebound video that's going to go out, funny enough, on Mass Effect, but I've been playing it lately. And, you know, I recommend to people who are feeling angry or bitter or whatever, like, it's gaming, like, let's try to have some fun here and just play something you enjoy. Like, for me, I feel very upset after almost 60 hours with Veilguard, but I've been playing some Mass Effect. I'm like, this is good. Like, this is really nice to have. I've been playing some Origins. I've been playing KOTOR. Like, I've just been in my BioWare recuperation process. But nonetheless, this video is getting rambly. This is going to be my last BioWare video for a little bit, and definitely my last video for the week. I'm going to take the weekend off for some R&R. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts on how Dragon Age Veilguard is doing down below with the data that's been provided. Let me know what you're thinking about the next Mass Effect game. As you can hear, my dog is whining. He needs to go out right now. So I'm going to wrap this one up. I'll catch all of you in the next video. Have a great weekend. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.